Chatman Friday, a podcast for Maine in North and West Melbourne. Chatman Friday. Welcome to another episode of Chatman Friday. Me, Syed, again with Ian here.
And today we have an interview with Laurence Angwin, a long-time associate of the centre here in North and West Melbourne and a long-term resident of this area as well. I've been given a long bio for Laurence, but I'm going to be a bit lazy and hand it over to him to describe himself, if that's okay, Laurence.
Certainly.
Very welcome, Laurence. Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, well, thank you very much for the introduction. As Ian said, my name is Laurence Angwin, and I moved into West Melbourne about 44 years ago as a young man. And at that time, West Melbourne, and to a degree North Melbourne, was a very quiet inner suburb. West Melbourne had a population of 150 residents.
Wow.
There were many, many buildings in the area, of course, but many of the fine houses were used as offices for either lawyers, solicitors, chemical companies, etc., etc. So the area was, as I said, a lot quieter. I have always had an interest in Chinese porcelain and have collected that over the years. And with my hobbies, I am a guerrilla gardener and have been doing so in Capel Street and North Melbourne for the past 40 years. And at times it brought me to grief with the Melbourne City Council because I had pot plants in front of a house and that was against the regulations of the Melbourne City Council. So over the years, 3 times, I'd had warnings from the council about having plants on the street.
Did you ever get fined?
No, I was threatened with fines, and so I would pull up everything, leave it for 6 months, and then slowly but surely just start with one pot at a time to start building up my plant collection again. Because when I moved into the area all those years ago, Melbourne City Council had more or less neglected the area. The whole of my street, Capel Street, and the block it was on was condemned to be demolished by the council in order to make room for a new and improved Melbourne City Council market. So within the block I lived in, there were many vacant blocks where houses or buildings had been pulled down as residents had moved out. So it had a rather down-at-heel feel to it from an outsider's point of view, and there'd been no tree planting in the area since about 1880. So the few trees we did have were there from the Victorian period. The area has very large streets, so you could imagine there was just sometimes it appeared fields and fields of asphalt. Just very wide footpath, very wide street, parking in the middle of the street, and barren and dry in summertime, and then very dull and cold it felt in wintertime.
You're painting a very depressing picture there, Laurence.
Well,
has it changed, I guess, is the key
as
question.
a young person,
Yes.
that didn't matter because it was the households that we lived in that we loved and cherished. And it was still a vibrant neighbourhood. There were still many migrants from Italy, Malta, Turkey in the area. And even in Capel Street, there were a number of houses that were for elderly Chinese. They were boarding houses. And the elderly Chinese had no English, but had come here in the 60s from Hong Kong and worked at the Queen Victoria Market for many years.
This is North and West Melbourne Neighbourhood Centre, and we host programs and activities for locals. Visit us at nwmnc.org.au or call us at 9328 1126, or even better, come in person at 58 Errol Street, North Melbourne.
Yeah, Yeah, just thinking, I mean, you talked a lot about history, but what's it like now? What does it feel like living in, is it Capel or Capel?
Yeah, Capel Street.
Capel Street in today's environment? Is it hopefully less depressing than what you've described from the past?
Capel Street today is far more vibrant street. All the empty blocks were replaced with lots of social housing. So about 30 new residences were built just within that Capel Street block, and it has housed some of the same families for the past 30 years. So there is a real sense of community with people when they stay in an area year in and year out. And everyone starts to have a sense of ownership of the area and start to take pride. So many people are interested in gardening and keeping issues about planting and the greening of the area close to heart. Many young families moved into the area, and they have grown up over the years, and then their parents have stayed on, and many of them have contributed greatly to the area.
Right, so it's quite multicultural these days, like much of Melbourne, I guess. And you've had a long association with history groups, which we'll come to later in more detail. But
Yes.
I'm aware of one particular book that I have a copy of at home, which has your house on the front cover.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, the Hotham History Group has been active for about the past 40 years in North and West Melbourne. And when looking back at all the volumes and books and papers published, majority of them were about North Melbourne. North Melbourne is a much larger suburb than West Melbourne, therefore will have more history and more area to cover. So it was decided to just look specifically at the suburb of West Melbourne and write about its history. And that's very interesting. It goes back to its pre-colonial history, early colonial history, and then into the early Victorian period onwards. A few houses were chosen. People like myself had done a lot of research into the houses, and many of them proved to be houses built by owner builders, so they spared no expense when they did a few frills to the properties and made them solid indeed. The house I live in, 62 Capel Street, and the one next door, 64 Capel Street, were built in 1864 and 1865 subsequently. They were the first houses in the street. And because they have such fine detail and they are so old for the area, they have had a Heritage Victoria classification and also a National Trust classification.
Right. That's right. Laurence, I would like to ask you, you have speak about the place and as you said, it was more quiet at that time.
Yes.
May I tell us a little bit about the people and lifestyle at those times and maybe around 1980s?
Yes. Well, in the 1980s, there were a lot of young people living in Capel Street because the housing was very cheap. Therefore, students or young people who were just starting off on their career, like myself, I just graduated as a teacher for English as a second language,
Right.
and had a posting to Midway Hostel in Maribyrnong to teach adolescent boat children. Many other of the houses had artists living there, screen printers, painters, writers. Helen Garner had lived in the house next door to me before I had moved in. So it had a very artistic feel and very community feel amongst young people. They were either hippies / bohemians. So it was very interesting. So great parties were organised and art happenings were happening from time to time at galleries or in restaurants.
Yes, beautiful. And the people were probably, they had more fun on the weekends those times too, right? Or in the evenings after jobs.
Yeah, that's right indeed.
They gather in some specific place in Western North or North Melbourne.
Yeah, well, there
You
was
remember?
in Peel Street, North Melbourne, not far from Capel Street,
Right.
was a venue called Trisha's, and that was a drag venue. So Trisha was a lorry driver during the week, and then on weekends opened up the cafe,
Right.
and had all sorts of performances, including wild drag shows
Sounds like fun.
in the area. So yeah, that was very much fun.
Yeah.
Indeed, and it was about one of the only places in the area where one could buy cigarettes after hours, which is important in those was important in those days.
Yeah.
So can I go back to you talked about teaching, and it seems to be quite a central part of your life. You've got the homework club here at the centre. Tell us about, well, you did your teaching training, but you had a lot of connection with overseas students. Can you talk a bit more about that and what attracted you to that area?
Yes. When I started teaching, I was given a class of young teenage, they were called pre-literates, which was a euphemism for illiterate students. So they were all Vietnamese. I then took on that challenge, and I went to Footscray Institute of Technology, now Victoria University, for 2 years to evening classes to study Vietnamese, because it is important for people learning English also to maintain their own mother tongue. And if they're learning to read and write English, I thought it was important for them to learn to read and write Vietnamese as well. So in that way, I could teach bilingually, and it made it much easier for everyone. I enjoyed working in that hostel environment. Many of the students had come through either Indonesia or the Philippines, refugee camps, some there for a few months, some there for many years, and they always had a good opinion, and their faces lit up when they spoke about those countries and their experience, whereas those that had been to other countries in Southeast Asia, the experience was not pleasant, and they didn't particularly want to talk about it. I had been to Indonesia various times and had picked up the language, and I just thought it would be a very interesting opportunity to work for the United Nations in a refugee camp for Vietnamese people, Vietnamese refugees, at the time called boat people. So I applied. Mid-80s, I had a position on a jungle island south of Singapore, and I worked with Vietnamese children, set up kindergarten, primary school, secondary school, and overhauled the adult education. And that was a very important and very profound time in my life, actually.
Yeah. You know, it's very interesting for me, the conversation or the memories that you're sharing for me. I'm hearing those memories from that time. I'm new in Australia, like 6-7 years is nothing. And I'm hearing stories from the time I haven't born. I was not born. And 45 years ago, I'm hearing things from the place I'm living now.
Right.
What was happening? But let's continue after a short break. Then we will come back and we will continue this interesting memories.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sing Now Community Choir. Join music director Susie Kelly in this inclusive community choir for adults of all ages. The choir sings music from across the world and spanning many decades. No previous experience is required. For more info, call us at 9328 1126 or visit our website.
Welcome back, everybody. Here today, again, talking with Laurence Angwin. I called you Angwin before, so I apologise for my
That's all right.
mispronunciation.
Yes,
I'm
it's
very bad with those things.
Odd Celtic name.
Yeah. But I wanted to go back to your Capel Street description, and I think you might have some interesting stories to tell us about what went on in the day, or any funny stories or anecdotes in relation to that part of West Melbourne.
Yes, well, when I was talking about the earlier days, that was full of interesting young people, as I said, bohemian, hippie, artists, but also next door to me were two lock-up garages, if you like, next door to me with roller doors, and in the second garage lived Frank. Now, Frank had brought a caravan into the lock-up garage. So he lived in a caravan. He had outdoor table and chairs, and in summertime an umbrella inside the garage. And he lived there for many years with a mate and with Goldie the dog. Now, Frank was an after-hours retailer of alcohol.
Well, that's a polite way of describing it.
Right, yeah. He sold alcohol illegally after hours. So there were plenty of people in the area that wanted a drink after 10 p.m. And at times, people misjudged Frank's address and would knock on my door or knock on my front window, calling out, Frank, are you there? Frank. And then we'd have to open the door and say, no, Frank is 2 doors down. So then we would hear a furtive tap at the door. Then we would hear, wolf, 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 wolf. Then we'd hear Frank say, Goldie, get down, Goldie, get down. And then the customer would enter the garage, do their exchange, and then leave very happy person. So Frank had a roaring trade for many years, and we got on famously. Then behind these lock-up garages were deep alcoves, and in one of the alcoves, just next to my back fence, lived an elderly gentleman who was referred to as the Professor. And the Professor was a dear elderly man, and he had set up bedding in this back area, water supply, he had a tin for biscuits, this, that, the other, and then he had an insatiable appetite for books. So whenever we'd finished with any of the books we were reading, we would pass them on to the Professor, and he would be very grateful. So during the day he would be out and about, then at night time he would come back to his alcove, the safety of his alcove, for a sleep. So we kept an eye on the Professor for many years and, had a great relationship with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Laurence, back to the knocking your windows.
Yes.
That was very interesting for me. How often that would happen? Every night or late night sometimes?
Frank had a roaring trade, especially what they call on paydays for people, and we would have someone knock at the door or on the front window maybe once every fortnight. Okay. So it could be midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., but that's all right. We just got used to it.
You got angry on some of them?
No, never angry because there was just living in a city.
Yeah.
We just learned to cope. Yeah, to not cope, but to live with everybody else.
But you're
and
lucky.
Appreciate their businesses.
You were lucky that time was not too busy like now. If it would be like now, so maybe you got a lot of knocking every night.
Yeah, indeed. Well, now most of the noise comes from car parking because Capel Street is just a block, a stone's throw from the Queen Victoria Market. The street is constantly has traffic in and out. So I think there must be thousands and thousands of cars that use that street every week, if not passing through either to park. And, of course, these days we have a very vibrant night market. So the street is full of cars on a Wednesday evening. And then there is the Sunday market. So that makes the area very vibrant and very busy. Whereas in the past, the market used to close at midday on Saturday. There'd be a mad scram to the market to get there by midday because many bargains were to be found from midday. And also no Sunday market. And there was no Sunday trading in the city.
Of course, yeah.
The whole area became very quiet and very calm. And therefore the transport was very infrequent. The number 55 tram, Coburg to Toorak, didn't even run on a Sunday because it was seen as, so quiet.
Laurence, I'm guilty. I do park in your street every Sunday to go to the market. I apologise. But looking at the street now, it's been gentrified quite a lot from what you described in the 80s. So what's changed about the culture and the accessibility and the services in the area over that time?
I worked with horticulturalists and Melbourne City councillors about 30 years ago to have replaced the Victorian tree scape. That was the tree had elms and oak trees planted in the street, which had grown to quite a size and quite a height and cast beautiful shade over the housing stock. But slowly but surely, in the middle of the street, most of the trees had been removed by the time I came there, and then the last few trees were removed in the late 80s, and that was all for ease of car parking. Fewer trees meant more space for cars.
Yes.
So I was saying I work with horticulturalists and the Melbourne City Council to have street trees replaced because many of them were elms. That was out of the question due to Dutch elm disease. So it was scarlet oak trees that were chosen. So the council wanted to pull up the footpath and plant the trees there. But no, in the Victorian treescape, the trees were always planted on the roadway. So that was all approved and that was all lovely. Then the engineering department of Melbourne City Council sent us all a letter, those who were approved of the tree planting. However, if we had trees planted on the roadway, we would lose 8 car parks in the street, residential car parks.
Oh, that's always a challenge, isn't it?
If we had them planted on the footpath, there would be no loss of car parking. However, we all wanted the trees planted back on the road where they were originally, and it's a much better outcome physically and environmentally, I believe, to have them on the roadway, and also it reduces the number of cars in the street.
And I guess too that area that there's houses didn't have garages, right? So everyone had to park on the street.
That's right. Looking at the street back in the 80s and then now, one can see how nothing was really done, as I said, from the Victorian times to the 1980s, 1990s by the City Council. Then they became aware of the heritage and the great beauty they had in the area and started to put some money back into the area by greening the street. And that has happened to most streets in West Melbourne. And these days there are even pocket parks or very large pocket parks planted by closing off roadways by the Melbourne City Council. The top of Capel Street and Courtenay Street is one example. Beautiful. And many of our parks, like Flagstaff Gardens, it was basically lawns with specimen trees. Now it is more trees with lawns. And I have just seen the area get greener over the years. When I first moved in, the only wildlife were pigeons and sparrows. Now I get all sorts of beautiful wildlife, native finches, native birds of all variety coming. Very common to wake up to the sound of beautiful bird song and then try to identify that particular native bird. For the fig trees in the area, I have a large one in my garden. There, every summer, there are the fruit bats that come and feast on the tree. There have been bushy-tail possums, but at the moment, I have a family of ringtail possums that come and feast on the tree and anything else that's green and good-looking in the area. So I think there are just many more green corridors from the countryside into the city. And just it shows what a cleaner and greener environment we have if we're having all this native wildlife in our midst.
Nature comes back after all.
That's right, that's right.
Yes.
The men's afternoon tea. It's a casual get-together for some food and a chat with other men from the neighborhood. New people are highly encouraged and it's free. It happens fortnightly Thursdays, 2:30 to 4 p.m. at 58 L Street, North Melbourne.
You guys believe me or not, I don't want to finish the show. It's very interesting. It's you're speaking and I was...
We can have him back again another time.
I was imagining like pictures in my mind.
Yeah.
I was imagining that time. So it was very nice. It was very, very interesting episode. So
Thank you.
But I want to ask the last questions.
Yes.
What will be your biggest live advice, your biggest advice to the youth, to the people?
With many years hindsight, I would suggest to young people today that they need money, so they work part-time at one of the fast food outlet chains, and that's very good. But to maybe not work more than 8 to 10 hours a week. They must have a life-work balance, and they need to, especially year 10, 11 and 12, concentrate on their schooling, because whatever they decide in those years at school and then what the outcome is can direct them for the rest of their life for many young people. So I suggest they enjoy a work experience, but don't let that become a preoccupation.
Yeah.
Be preoccupied at school, enjoy your studies, and just realise that these are the most informative years of one's life.
Right.
So a work-life balance, and then, of course, to concentrate as much as they can on their studies,
Beautiful.
because that will, have an important outcome for them later in life.
Brilliant. Well, we've run out of time, unfortunately, so
Yes.
we have to wrap up at this point. But I'd just like to thank you again, Laurence, for coming in, spending time, and more importantly, thanking you for your broader association with the North and West Melbourne Neighbourhood Centre, because you've done an awful lot for the centre over the years. And I'm wondering, Sayed, whether one day we could have Laurence back to talk more in detail about the Homework Club.
Yeah. I really like to have you next time in some other shows too.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurence.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. This was another episode of Chatman Friday this week, and we will be back in the same podcast next week, Friday, with another guest, yeah?
Yeah, indeed.
Yes.
Hope to see you then.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers now.
Chat Man Friday, a podcast for Maine in North and West Melbourne.